we are going to be speaking on the evolution of CSS from simple style sheets to a modern programming language. I'm pretty sure all of you are wondering, why is he saying a modern programming language? And that is what we will speak about today. This talk, what's in it for you? This is the part I'll tell you about, oh, CSS is this, CSS is good, CSS is that, but I'm pretty sure that you guys know what it is about, right? Right? So, to give some people here that do not know what CSS is about, I'll give you a quick refresh. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it is popularly known as the style sheets language of the web. It's what you see that beautifies the web. It gives the web life. Is without CSS, in fact, your website is looking dead and as if it's from 1960. It's just like having a building without any color. Imagine life being black and white. That's how CSS will be like, right? That's how life will be without CSS. Any website will be without CSS. And in this talk, you will learn the history of CSS, seeing it transform from the simple style sheet it currently is to now a modern programming language. I'm sure some of you are seeing this programming language aspect and you're like, what does he mean? What does he mean? You'll soon find out. Just chill. You'll find out very soon. We've already talked about this. Oh, I even forgot. We're also going to look at the Turing completeness of CSS and what that means. Plus the new features and new syntax that you would see in the coming months and years. Plus, I have some CSS-only games that we can try. Some that I tried to build but failed, and some that you can popularly see online. Now, a brief history about CSS. Please, can somebody tell me what is wrong with this? Does anybody know? What is wrong with this? 2.1, good. You see CSS evolving from 1 to 2 to 2.1 and 3. But what does this 2.1 mean? Now, to understand what this 2.1 means, you need to first of all understand the genesis of how CSS began. It began in the year 1994 when a guy named William, please, I'm going to butcher his name. Sorry, if you are Russian or any foreigner in this place? Nobody? Okay, good. Successfully going to butcher this name in front of all of you. His name is pronounced William. Hey, gosh. His name is William Berners-Lie. Like W-I-U-M, then Berners, B-E-R-N-E-S, then L, you know what, L-I-E. Lie. His name is that. It's one funny Russian name like that. And he had a browser that he built, but back in the day, in the early years of the 1990s, you won't find any website or web pages that had life, that had styles. And designers were looking for a way to beautify their pages. Both authors and readers were trying to bridge that gap between design and structure, or HTML structure. And in fact, in the early 1990s, you only find HTML pages, just plain old pages and images. But this guy thought that, this thing is not going to be good though. I need to create a solution for this problem. So he now wrote a draft for the first CSS specification. And to really understand how CSS specification works, first of all, the people, or there are some devs like yourselves, or PhD holders that will come together and write out a specification for how CSS is going to be. And then browsers will then take what they've written, translate it into their browser engine, and transform it into what we know today as CSS. Do you understand? So it's a whole weird process that goes on behind the scenes before you can have a beautiful website. But it's just like every other thing in life, right? There's nothing good that comes easy. So now, this guy wrote the first. Why do I always kick this water? Forgive me. But this water is against me. So this guy wrote the first draft of CSS specifications alongside, He wrote it alongside somebody. Let me quickly get the name for you. He wrote it alongside Bet Boss. Excuse me, his name is Hakon Lee. Please, I'm not going to pronounce that name very well. Just forgive me. And it's what we know as CSS today. It's what began this whole journey of CSS. In fact, without his specification in CSS1 that had basic colors, texts, there was no display flex, there was no display grid. They only had tables, something called display running, and the likes. But he built that to beautify the web, and then it evolved into CSS2. Now, CSS2 fixed the issues that were present in CSS1 after a lot of feedback was taken from devs at that time. And it then evolved into something that we know of as CSS3. But before that, right? Before that, you can see the points. I told you that we were going to talk about the 2.1, right? Right? Now, this 2.1, the devs at the time were trying to experiment with certain features, trying to take feedback from people like us that, oh, this thing is not right. For example, you would have color orange. Some devs would think, why should we have named colors like color orange? Or why should we have named colors like gray and gray? Do you know, like the British naming convention for gray and the American naming convention for gray is different, right? But they are both the same. So over time, they started improving on new features. New features started being added. Some things started being fixed. And some properties started becoming truncated, right? So as they were taking feedback and processing things, because they knew that CSS3 was coming, they now decided to name it CSS 2.1. In fact, if you read your documentation very well about CSS, because I love CSS, you will find out that it doesn't even limit to CSS 2.1. There's something also missing here. And I was expecting somebody that was very smart to just tell me. It's actually CSS 2.2. So the real timeline goes CSS1, there's CSS2, CSS 2.1, CSS 2.2, and now we have CSS 3. Now we have CSS 3. Now, this is an example of how the website looked in the past. I mean, this is, if you've ever built a website like this, please raise your hand. You just know. Like, you've submitted this. Be honest, though. If people want to form, God bless you. But you built something like this. I have. I know. Thank you. My first website was just a picture centered on a page. And I said, yes, this is good. But that was how people built their websites in those days. In fact, this is one of the earliest HTML planned websites that you'd see. And now you can now move to something modern, something nice. This is not beautiful. It's not nice. It's just like you moving from primary school to secondary school. You don't upgrade. You don't change style. Or secondary school to university. Like that my brother there that was telling me he's doing 2 degrees. Oh my gosh. I wonder how he was 7 years ago. I want to be like you when I grow up, Sha. But this is how it now looks like, the modern nature of websites, but evolving into something incredible. Something that even in our everyday coding life would change, right? CSS is evolving into something beautiful, something incredible that you would use every day and change the way you write. So imagine in the last 20 years, we moved from that website to this. Imagine what the next 20 years will look like. And that now brings me, we've already spoken about this, how CSS1 was. You just had little things, the border, the font, and then CSS 2.0, 2.1, and 2.2 just had some little variants to it. And then, if you notice, I didn't talk about something, which is CSS 3, right? CSS 3 brought in a whole lot of new features. In fact, who has heard of the at function at rule here? One person. That's good. Who has also heard of if function? The if function. You've heard of it. So some people here are current and they are up to date. I like that. So this is just a very brief summary of how CSS 3 is moving. In fact, I deliberately put this over here for you to understand what I'm talking about, right? Put that over there. And now, you need to know who decides what features come into CSS? Who are the people that say, okay, this is the feature that I want. This is how I want CSS to be. This is how I want my website to look like. I want to be able to do 3D animation easily. I want to be able to do, I want to be able to let the website roll over. I want to be able to see the website in real life. In fact, I want to enter into the website. Who are the people that decide these standards? The first is basically the group in charge of HTML. I can't, forgive me, but for some reason, this name is escaping my head. So who can tell me the full meaning of that? WHAT working group. Who knows the full meaning? There's something I'll give you. I will give you something, yes. Though, I don't look up online. In fact, you're looking up online. Though, hey, I have people that want to scam. But don't worry, I'll give you time to look up for that. But who can tell me the meaning of the next one? World Wide Web. Correct. Please clap for her. Beautiful. First one. Who wanted to answer for the first one? You just read from your phone. Okay, that's correct. And the last person that decides these standards is you. You and I. You can always go on GitHub yourself and contribute to how you want CSS to be. In fact, let me tell you something. The first ever CSS, one of the first few CSS documentations I contributed to as a technical writer was on MDN. And all I just had to do was scroll down to the page and look at how I can contribute. And I just added the information I thought was wrong. If something doesn't make sense, maybe it actually doesn't make sense. So question things, always question things. So you are part of the people that decide these processes and you enhance the development into what we know as CSS today. And now, we now go into the very big question, CSS flow. Declarative versus imperative. Can you answer this question for me? CSS is a programming language? No, Abi. It's not. Good. I hope by the end of this talk, your mind will change a bit, or you would rather move into thinking in a different light. So what's the difference between imperative and declarative? It's all about control flow. I'll give a very good example. So if I ask you the question, where is your house? Right? Some people would give me a straight answer and just say, it's in Banana Island. Abi, I have people like that here. Rich kids. Okay. But some other people will give me an answer to tell me that my house is located at Banana Island, so. You can get there by taking a bus from Costain to Ejeolegba. I don't know where the Banana Island is, so forgive me. Then to Ketu, then to Korodu, and then you arrive at Banana Island. Well, Abi? Correct. So that detailed explanation of how things are done, of how you get a result, is what you now refer to as imperative paradigm, right? And the one that just gives you a statement just like that is what you now call declarative. Just a straightforward answer. And that's the difference between having a programming language that is imperative and declarative. Where am I going with this? You can see here that languages like JavaScript, which is actually declarative and imperative, have this syntax where it follows a sequence of instructions. In fact, a programming language, as Wikipedia would define it, is a sequence of instructions that the computer understands. Abi, right? So you would have this sequence of instructions that translate into ones and zeros that your computer can understand. And this is what the imperative programming can do. Step-by-step instructions on how to do these things and what to do. But for declarative, things like SQL, HTML, and even CSS will just define it by that. For example, in SQL, you have select asterisk from a particular table, Abi. And in CSS, you would have this. I'm using the @function @rule to define a dashed border. This is something new that you guys should know, by the way. I'm using the function attribute to define a dashed border, and it's accepting a parameter called color. This parameter is actually the variable name. And what it returns is, and this is so this parameter here is, this one here that is doing red is actually the default color, right? And what it returns here is a 2px dashed color of any kind. The default is just red. It returns that. That is it. But for JavaScript, you can see I'm saying if this, that, if this, that. But why am I telling you all this? What is the essence of all these things? I asked you this question. So is CSS, now that you understand it, is CSS now a declarative programming language? You still don't agree with me, Abi? I understand. We are getting there. One of the ways to define a programming language is something called the Turing complete test. Has anybody heard of that before? The Turing complete test. So a way to know a language is actually a programming language is by letting that language pass through the Turing complete test. And this Turing complete test has two conditions. Can we say two conditions together? The first condition is this. The first one is it needs to accept a statement and return whether it is true or false. Basically, it should have the ability to determine whether a statement is true or false. And the second condition is that it needs to be able to run in an infinite amount of times and never stop. But there's a problem with that second condition. What's the problem? There's a problem with that second condition, which we would look into. But before we even look into that, there's something also called the cellular automation in CSS. Now, this cellular automation in CSS is one of the complex ways to determine whether CSS is Turing complete. Now, Lara, who can pronounce that name for me? Shank, Abi? Okay, Lara Shank Kaki. Anyway, Lara Shank Kaki, the thing, see, this is what she said. She said the thing is, there is no device on planet Earth that has memory, that has arbitrary memory. So how can we really know if a problem is undecidable or not? She's basically saying that how can we know if this problem that we're giving this our machine can run in an infinite amount of times without stopping? Because there will be a time that it will definitely stop. Whether the machine switches off, whether the program stops running because it crashes, but there will be a time it switches off. It just cuts off. So that's why the second condition is not really looked at. And that's why we use the cellular automation, that complex problem, to now determine whether or not a programming language is Turing complete. Moving on, this is basically it. See, I'll be honest with you, it is very complicated. It is by some guy, and I'm not going to get into it. But this is it. There's a pattern it follows. Basically, the nearest neighbor needs to change to 0 or 1 based on certain conditions. And now the pattern is this. If the number is 111, return 0. If the number is 110, you know what? Return what? You can see it. If the number is 110, return what? 1 Abi. So it goes on like that. And that's what the rule of automation is. If the number is a certain way, return this. But did you guys know that CSS actually passed this test? In fact, many people are changing their opinion from CSS is not a programming language to CSS is now becoming more powerful than ever. And how do I know that CSS passed this test? Because I tried it. It's through what I would say is a little bit of hacks. Look at it. This is what, forgive me, So, let me just pause it. Let me pause it. Hey, let me go back. So as you can see, I did 101. And on the bottom, what did it return? Please. Let me remove. I wish my mouse was moved away. What did it return, please, on the nearest neighbor? Can you guys see it? Or is it too small? It's small, Abi? Okay, but I'll tell you what it says. Because it's green, it's showing one. Green basically means one. If it's any other color, it is just one. Just assume it is one. So what is returning on the bottom is 111. But what we just need is that single one in between. So it's actually just returning one. And this test proves that CSS is Turing complete. But this is still not deterministic, Abi. You're not still convinced, ba? So now we go on to the next one. If you want to test this thing out yourself, you can just scan this QR code and test out the cellular automation in CSS, pure CSS. But I'm sure you guys are not still convinced. Like, why would you say CSS is a programming language? What do you mean by that? I'm not ready to argue with anybody. So please, at the end of this, if you have any questions to argue, I know they. But moving on, I'm sure you're not still convinced, right? Right? Are you guys convinced? No, Abi. But it exists in a single domain, which is domain specific, right? CSS is declarative, as I've shown you, and we define a programming language as a set of computer instructions that a computer understands, right? Now, if I may, I can boldly say this, that CSS is a domain-specific declarative programming language. I know it is a mouthful, but I will show you why I think it is a domain-specific declarative programming language, aside from the fact that it is Turing complete. Now, having worked with CSS for, I think, over 5 years now, and writing on CSS documentation and CSS articles and guides, I can tell you for a fact that most things that you can produce in JavaScript, you can replicate in CSS today. In fact, some CSS games like Rock, Paper, Scissors, do you know that you can replicate it in just CSS? Do you know? So, before we get into the games and you explore backrooms, in fact, somebody even made a 3D game, 3D Mario game with just CSS. So I don't know what you guys are talking about. Now, these are the new features that you need to know about for CSS. There are math functions present. There are things like if. There are things like min. There are things like max. There are things like random. There are things like random item. A whole lot of functions. And in order for you to explore how these functions work, you can just look it up online. And then there are new art rules like art function, art layer, art view transition. These ones are just hopping up into your browser. And also, you need to take note of something. You need to take note of browser support for each of these features, so you don't implement a feature that is not yet supported across major browsers. And then you have CSS properties like position anchor, color scheme, and the rest. So these are what some of the new features that are coming out in CSS. In fact, I think the biggest breakthrough for CSS today is actually the if function. You know, the same way you have if function in JavaScript is now present in CSS, which allows programmers to build without having to worry about performance bottleneck, too much size on your JS, and things like that. Now, if you scan this QR code, you'll find a whole lot of CSS-only games that you can play, from CSS backrooms to some 3D CSS. In fact, I wish I could even show you some of the CSS 3D elements that I created myself with just pure CSS. But I think it's better explained in an article rather than told to you. So with that said, I want to encourage everybody here to have a changed mindset about the new nature of CSS, from its evolution from basic style sheets to creating things like CSS games, CSS 3D elements, introducing math functions into it, min, max, random, if, whatever it is you tell it. Go out today, in fact, contribute to any documentation, submit to any platform. CSS Tricks is always accepting guest authors, front-end masters as well, plus Piccalilli. Make sure to always break through and understand CSS a whole lot more. There's a lot of opportunities in front-end development, and I know people can say it is oversaturated, but trust me, as someone that is still working with CSS almost every single day, I can give you for a fact that it is evolving rapidly. In fact, there's always something new to learn every day. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, please make sure to meet me at the back. Thank you so much. Yeah, bye.